In Sri Lanka, which is facing its worst ever economic crisis, a crisis so bad that food, fuel, and life saving drugs are running short, the president has had to revoke emergency after mass protests on the street. I'm Barkha Dutt, and you're with the Mojo Story. We'll be going across to Sri Lanka in moments from now to talk to a leading opposition member of parliament on what might be the way ahead for her beleaguered country. But first, let's take you through the key points. The Rajapaksa government did attempt to throttle free speech in the middle of an economic crisis by blocking out social media and imposing an emergency. It's an emergency that President Rajapaksa has had to take back now. This after mass protests on the street, including by hundreds of thousands of students who marched in the rain. Sri Lanka is reeling from the worst ever economic crisis since its birth as an independent nation. India has opened a line of credit, but of course, from India's point of view, there are also concerns about the China factor. For Sri Lankans, though, this is about them, their survival, their dignity as a nation, and how to get by in the next few days and weeks to come. Let's go across now to Sri Lanka, where a leading opposition politician, Dr. Harini Amarasuriya, who's an MP from the NPP, joins us. Thank you very much, Dr. Harini. Let me start by asking you how you are, whether things are any better. What is the latest situation in the country?
Thank you, Barkha. Thank you for having me on the show. Uh, I can't give you any good news. We are still in a state of uncertainty. The protests are ongoing. Even today, people are out on the streets. Parliament met for the second day, but we haven't really come to any kind of agreement or resolution. In fact, we haven't even been able to discuss the meaningful issues in Parliament. It's been a lot of back and forth about throwing blame at each other, and I think the public are getting really impatient. So none of the issues have really been resolved, and there's a sense of as if the country is in a way crippled, right? And this can't go on for much longer. As you pointed out, we have a serious economic crisis, but I think what has happened now is that the political crisis has overtaken the economic crisis, making it even more difficult now to address those issues that we've been dealing with in the past several months.
Well, the opposition leaders such as yourself have declined the offer by the Rajapaksa government to be part of a unity government. Can you tell our audience why you turned down that offer?
Okay, so for us, the NPP, it has been very clear that that this government and its leaders in particular are responsible in a way for the crisis that we are in now. For mismanagement, for really bad policy decisions that were taken that led to the crisis. But above all, the people's protests that have been growing steadily over the past several days and weeks has been about focusing on governance issues as well. So it's not just about give us fuel, give us medicines, give us bring down the cost of living. They're now talking about issues of corruption, accountability, nepotism, all of these things, right? And they're demanding a fresh sort of governance model, and they're demanding that the Rajapaksas leave government, right? So as a party that's been part of the protests, we can't then, in good faith, abandon those demands and get into an alliance or even an interim arrangement with the ruling party.
So far, the president is refusing to quit, and his aide, I was reading, said 6.5 million people voted for him. If he does decline to get out of the way, what is the opposition thinking of doing next?
Well, there has to be some intervention from Parliament, and I think that's what we need to work towards. Parliament can actually, there are some options that are available within the current constitution. We can dissolve Parliament and go for a general election, but that still leaves the presidential position intact, right? Or we have to bring in an amendment to the constitution or a new act that can allow us to limit the time period of the current president, or to kind of come up with some other kind of interim arrangement that also responds to the demands that the people are making. Right now, the people are very clear that they want the Rajapaksas to resign. They want the president to resign. They want the prime minister to resign. and they don't want any other Rajapaksa in a position of authority. So there has to be some way in which, obvious, to make all the changes that are necessary, there has to be a fresh government. But for an interim arrangement, Parliament will need to intervene. Parliament would either have to bring in a new amendment to the Constitution that allows for an interim arrangement, or it has to work within the current Constitution and either go for a dissolution of Parliament, or uh, if the President resigns, then the Parliament has the option of appointing a new president from within the current members.
I want to go back to the financial crisis. The new finance minister resigned in less than 24 hours. The entire cabinet has resigned, but the Rajapaksas, especially the president, in fact, continue to dig his heels in, as it were. Now, what is the expectation among the Sri Lankan people from India at this point? There is, of course, a credit line of financial support open. But how is India being viewed? Is there a role for India at this moment?
No, for sure. I mean, India is our closest neighbor, right? And we've had historically very strong ties with India. And yes, there's financial, economic support, the line of credit that has been opened up with India. I think before this crisis, the government was negotiating for another line of credit and another loan. But I think what we also require from India right now is to stand with the people of this country and not just with the government, right? And to understand what the demands of the people are. And the demands of the people are beyond just extending a line of credit, but also they're now calling for the kind of structural reforms that are necessary to bring in a new political culture, right? So, and at this moment, I think it's extremely important for India to understand that and to stand by the people of Sri Lanka and not just look at it in terms of supporting the government to stay in power, or just as just merely as an economic crisis that requires intervention. That too is required. That is clearly one of the main problems that's affecting the people's daily lives. But there is a bigger crisis, and for resolving that, also we would need India to stand by the people of Sri Lanka.
That's an important point because the Rajapaksas have traditionally enjoyed personally sort of good relationships with a number of leaders here. And you're calling for India to look at the sentiment of the people on the ground. What about China? You know, one of the concerns in India is of course China's increasing influence in Sri Lanka at its ports and so on, and that is a big, huge concern for Indian security interests.
Yeah, that has always been a bone of contention during the past, especially during the Rajapaksas' two terms. This is the third term in which a Rajapaksa has been president, right? And their alignment with China has been an issue of concern for India. For us as the NPP, we feel that the in the interests of the country and in given our geopolitical location, we need to be really able to balance the different sort of the power blocks in our region and also globally. And that would mean that we don't seem to be aligned with any one power unnecessarily, or that we are allowing any one power to have more economic or political influence over Sri Lankan
Yeah.
territory, right? So in a way, that means sort of formulating a foreign policy that puts Sri Lankan interests first rather than the interests of a particular family or a particular regime or a particular agenda, right? And I think
Sure.
for several years we've really failed to have a kind of a coherent, cohesive kind of in a foreign policy that places the interests of Sri Lanka, given its geopolitical location and its sort of strategic importance in the region,
Yeah.
to maintain this kind of position. I mean, in the 70s, we did that. We did have a non-aligned policy. But it was since about 2005 that, at one point in the 80s, we swung towards the US, then towards China. We've had Indian intervention before, which didn't go down very well,
Mhm.
also, right? So I think we really need to have a kind of a foreign policy that allows us to remain friends with all the important countries in the region.
Well, at the moment, I think Sri Lanka has to tide over its immediate sort of
Yes.
existential crisis. Let me ask you in the end, ma'am, what is the one thing you would want people to understand about how bad it is in Sri Lanka? What is in dire shortage? Is everyday living now a crisis? Tell us a little bit about like what an average day is like for an average Sri Lankan.
No, it's become really difficult because we're running short of fuel. So people are having to queue up for fuel. People are there's a shortage of cooking gas. So people are lining up for gas. The cost of living is sky high, and there's now a shortage of essential medicines as well. We have a really good universal healthcare system, and the health and the medical fraternity, the medical community has come out recently saying that's at risk now, that they are unable to save, that lives are at risk because we don't have essential medication.
Yeah.
Because of the electricity cuts due to the energy crisis, people are undergoing long hours of power cuts. This is affecting children. This is affecting older people, the older population. So daily life has become hugely difficult, and I would say especially for women who've had to manage all of this, do jobs, manage. They now have to get up even earlier in the morning to be able to catch those few hours of power to kind of make sure the kids' clothes are ironed for school and the meals are cooked. So
Yeah.
then you have to go stand in line for gas, or you don't have gas, so then you have to look for alternatives for cooking. So it's become really, really difficult. It's
Well,
like
yeah.
daily chores that you sort of managed easily are now a challenge, right?
All I can say is we're sorry from a people to people level, whatever our governments negotiate is in a different plane for what all of you are going through. And we hope that Sri Lanka is able to emerge from the shadows of this crisis very soon. Dr. Harini Amarasuriya, opposition member of parliament of the NPP, it's a pleasure talking to you. Take care and stay safe.
Thank you. Thanks a lot,
Thank you.
Barkha.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.